do this, to talk about these things, and to be together and to meet together on this gorgeous day. Wow, I think if it had been a rainy day, we might have had to have so many people. It's interesting, someone called me this morning and they asked how I found my speakers, because we have incredible speakers, and I have to tell them I don't take credit for any of that, but I have really wonderful guides, and they make things available in front of me. And they said, well, for example, how did you meet Roby Rogers, our speaker for today? And I said, well, that one occurred because we had so many people coming from Madison to our meetings that I said there's got to be a Madison Ions. So I introduced Ingrid Dilley and Karen McKean, who did not know each other. I said, let's all go have lunch in Madison. And we did, and they put it together, and they divided the work, and they started the group, and it's one group. They have around 40 people or so every month. And they have a great website, and they bring in really nice speakers of all kinds. And lo and behold, you showed up at their meeting, or did Karen know you before?
I was dragged to the meeting.
She was dragged to the meeting. Anyway, that's how I got to know Roby. I was up there, I met her. And I was just delighted to find another doctor who had had an experience, because this is where this message can be so critical. And at the moment, that knowledge seems to be so lacking in many parts of the medical community. So I was just delighted. So let us give a warm welcome to Dr. Roby Rogers. Thank you. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me in the back? Okay.
Yeah, what?
Anyway, first of all, thank you to Diane for inviting me. Thank you to all of you for showing up today on this beautiful day. And thank you, many thanks to INES internationally. I really think without INES, I wouldn't be here today. I struggled so much after my near-death experience, trying to integrate it much as I think John, said. And all the medical knowledge I had really didn't help me one bit. And the doctors weren't helpful either. I mean, none of this was helpful at all. So, you know, I thank Ingrid Dilley and Karen McKean, who are two of my dearest friends now, and also my writing instructor, Pat Fitzgerald, who is a good friend of Karen's and who said one night to me, you and I are going to INES. You need this. And the only reason I went is because she dragged me. And I've been going since then. I've met a lot of wonderful people, and it really did change my life. I'm now 6 years out of my near-death experience, which I will talk about today, and feel like finally in this last year I've begun to integrate it and feel a little more grounded, a little more connected, a little more in touch with my life and who I am. And I will talk about all of those things today. First of all, I want to let you know I'm just recovering from some bronchitis, so I've got a cough drop in my mouth, and so if it's a little rattly, I apologize. But sometimes I lose my voice otherwise, so I do apologize for that. Secondly, two disclaimers. One is, although I'm an associate professor at the University of Wisconsin Medical School and the hospital and clinics, I do not represent them today. These are my own beliefs, my own ideas, my own experience. And when anybody's saying, oh, you know, Dr. Rogers represented UW, I don't. They wouldn't be happy with this. So just to make that really, really clear. The second thing I want to mention is that prior to this experience that I had, I wasn't spiritual at all, and I'm not trying to push any sort of definition of God or spirituality or religion on anybody. I'm going to just talk about my experience and where I see myself today. So those are my two disclaimers. Let me open my water bottle and I'll start talking. Well, I was having a great life until March of 1999. I was 43 years old at the time. I'd finished my 10 years of medical training. I was at the Medical University of South Carolina in Charleston, running the blood bank. And I lived on an island south of Charleston, a beautiful environment. I just bought 63 acres that was a wildlife habitat, which had been my lifelong dream. And I was about to build a house and a barn and move my wonderful horses to that property. I'd had a good life. I loved what I did. I was a workaholic. I worked 7 days a week, and I loved it. Loved my patients. I loved what I was doing. My patients said I was a kind, caring, and compassionate physician, and I thought I was too. Thought I was a really pretty good person, living the life I wanted to live. And I was most surprised to find that my life was about to take a sharp right-hand turn, and it's never been the same. So for those of you who said, I think John said, my life has never been the same, it is never going to be the same, and I'm still trying to come to grips with that. But what happened for me was, in June of 1998, I developed a life-threatening allergy to fire ants, which are very prevalent in the South, and went into anaphylaxis, which is allergic shock, went to the emergency room, got treated, recovered, and then underwent a period of about 9 months where I was getting allergy shots to try to desensitize me. And I would go into anaphylaxis almost with every shot, but it was never life-threatening. On this particular Friday, March 12th of 1999, I'd had an allergy shot as usual, didn't feel well, but went back to work. That was in the morning. About 11:30, I went to the next door and asked one of the nurses, I said, where's the medication? I don't feel well. And she said, well, why don't you sit down and I'll put an IV in. And I remember thinking at the time, why does she want to put an IV into my arm? All I want is some Benadryl. Some people are smarter. Shortly thereafter, I went into full-blown anaphylaxis, was transported to the emergency room, treated with IV epinephrine, did not have a near-death experience, and I uneventfully recovered, and I thought all would be fine. And the reason I wanted everything to be fine is that I was in a two-physician practice, and I've been doing the work of two physicians for almost 2 years. And we finally hired somebody, and I was about to go on my first vacation in a very long time, and I was going to go for a month. And I wasn't going anywhere. All I wanted to do was stay home and ride my horse. So all I had to do was get to 5 o'clock that day, Friday, March 12th. You can see what's going to happen. So when I went, took this little detour to the ER, I thought, no problem. Give me the epinephrine, I'll be fine. I was fine. That was at noontime. Well, the physician who was there had seen me the last time. He said, last time you refused to be admitted. He said, I really would like to admit you this time to the hospital and watch you overnight. I said, okay, because I still didn't feel quite right. So, fine. I go up to the room. It's about 5 o'clock, and my assistant medical director who'd just been hired came to see me. And they said, well, we're going to give you some long-acting epinephrine. Now, to put it in perspective, what I was about to be given is an epinephrine that lasts, it's very slow, and it's 50 times stronger than what they give you in the IV. Instead of lasting for 12 minutes, which is what I had in the morning, it lasts for 5 hours. And again, it's 50 times stronger than what they give you as an IV form. It's supposed to go in your arm, into the fat, slowly absorb. Fine. I didn't know that, however. What they did was gave me that epinephrine IV as a push. 50 times stronger than what it's supposed to be. I don't know if any of you have ever had IV epinephrine, but you know how you get really scared and you feel that straight jolt through your heart? Multiply that probably by 100 or 200 times, and that's what I felt. If you look in the medical literature, it will tell you that it's very often fatal, and it's fatal in one of 3 ways. Either you bleed into your head, you have a heart attack, or you bleed into your lungs and drown. And I didn't know that at the time. All I knew was that the moment I was given this, I experienced the most incredible pain I've ever had in my entire life. I remember reaching for my head because I truly thought it was going to blow off my neck. And what epinephrine does is it constricts all of your blood vessels very, very tightly. That's why it's so effective. And it did that. And that's what really started, that was the moment that changed my life forever. It's about 5 o'clock in the evening, as I said. And I remember seeing bright red and orange, and it was excruciatingly painful. And over the next, I don't know how long exactly, because shortly thereafter I couldn't see anymore, but probably over the next 2 or 3 hours, I became progressively weaker and weaker. I was lying in this hospital bed. It was a medical emergency. I could hear people. I got to the point where I could no longer move, I could no longer see, but I could still hear. And that's where I started learning about how I was going to treat patients differently. You know, I've often said every physician should be a patient. It changes the way you practice medicine, and I promise I talk about that today. Well, the first thing I learned is, even if you can't move and you can't see, you can still hear. And I could, and what I could hear was this. Oh, her heart rate's back up to 160. Oh, her blood pressure's this. Where's the medicine from the pharmacy? It's steroids. And I'm thinking, oh, this is not good. It is bad to be a physician who is a patient, because I knew if they were giving me steroids, nobody knew what was going on at the time. And that's, in fact, nobody did know until sometime later what was actually happening. So there I am, you know, and I'm still, my heart is just pounding and I cannot breathe. My respiratory rate was about 40, which is about 4 times what it should be. And this went on and on and on. And the next thing I remember is something that also I'll never do again to anybody. And that was, I remember somebody from far away yelling at me saying, Roby, Roby, turn your head. And I'm thinking, I can't turn my head. You know, don't you realize it's taking all the energy I have just to keep my heart and lungs going? That's all the energy I have. And finally, I must have slowly turned my head. I remember trying really hard, and I felt like I couldn't. I felt like I was in concrete. I must have turned my head hard enough because, or enough because they stopped yelling at me. But they were a long way away at that point. And time kept going on. I have no concept of time because I couldn't see. And what I remember is that the energy just kept going out, incredible intense pain. And I couldn't see anybody, but I got the sense that there were people all around my bed, I mean real people, physicians. And my assistant medical director was holding my hand, bless her heart. And at some point, I was getting weaker and weaker and weaker, and I realized that. But, you know, I'm used to physical pain. I spent 10 years as a pretty high-level gymnast. I have no problem with physical pain. And I also got through medical school. So I figured I could beat this. And so I just kept thinking, oh, it's going to get better. Next minute, it's going to get better. It's going to get better. Well, it didn't. It got worse and worse and worse, and I was getting more and more tired, and then more and more pain. And I realized, listening to the doctors around me, that since nobody knew what was happening, I got to a moment where I realized, oh my God, if something doesn't change, I'm going to be dead in a few hours. I'm 43 years old. I'm in good health, except for this allergy shot that I got this morning. And I'm going to be dead through no fault of my own. And furthermore, I am stuck in this body that is dying. And what was odd about this was that my brain was still fully functional. Just like I'm talking to you now. I'm busy thinking and feeling and carrying on, and my body's dying, and I realized that. The moment I realized I was actually dying was the most panicked feeling I've ever had in my entire life. Because I felt like I was trapped in my body. And for me, one of the residuals of that is that I'm now very claustrophobic. I don't like dark places because it was dark. And I don't like to be in small enclosed spaces because that's how my body felt at that point. So at that moment, I had this that flash of, oh my God, I'm going to die. And the next second was, okay, what do I have to do to stay alive? So I said, fine, I'll focus. I will focus all my energy into my center just like I did when I was a gymnast. So I did that. And that worked for a while. I can't tell you how long because I couldn't see. And then pretty soon I realized I'm still losing ground. And I can't believe this, but I'm losing ground. So I said, okay, where else can I get energy? So then I thought about all the love that my family and friends have for me and how sad they would be if I died that day. And I used that love to keep me going for a while. I put it in my center. Pretty soon that didn't work either. And so then I thought about God's love and put that in my center. And that worked for a while. But eventually I could feel like I was still losing ground. And at that point, something very interesting happened. My room became filled with golden light. And there were 2 angels appeared at the foot of my bed, up and off to the left. And they looked like little cherub angels. They were about 2 feet high. They were just gorgeous. They were dressed in the most beautiful christening dresses that I have ever seen. The dresses were white with all different kinds of almost patchwork lace and embroidery. And there was one patch, and I still don't know why, but one patch that was sort of a salmon peach color. And they were gorgeous. The yellow light went through them and also emanated from them. And once they arrived, I felt so much better. I still was aware that I was in incredible pain, and I was still in my body, but I no longer was really upset about this pain, and I didn't really feel it intensely. And it was very, very comforting. And that's where I learned another lesson, which is when people are dying, if they see folks, angels or spirits, you know, typically in medicine we want to just medicate them more. Oh, you're hallucinating. Well, you know, that was the most comforting thing for me, was to see those two angels. And so now, if people, I tell folks, you know, if you see somebody, fine. If they are helpful to you and they're comforting, great. No, we don't need to medicate that out of people. I feel like we should be encouraging that because it is so comforting. So the angels came, and I'm still losing ground, but now it's not worrying me. And very near the end, I thought, oh, if I could just touch my dog again, I know I would feel better. Now my dog Brinder, an English, black and white English Springer Spaniel, had passed away about 3 or 4 years before that. And I always said about her that when I touched her, I felt like I was touching heaven, which was sort of an odd statement from somebody who wasn't spiritual prior to this point and who'd never been to heaven. But, that's how I always felt. And I met her when she was 45 minutes old, and I used to touch her, and she and I would go off to a place where there was no sense of time, space, or physical presence. And I might be gone for an hour. And this happened through the whole 14 and a half years of her life. And I could never explain it. It has never happened to me before or since with any animal or person. But I would touch her, and she and I would just be off as two beings. And it was wonderful. And so the closest I could ever come to describing that was to say, I feel like I'm touching heaven when I touch her. So I said, oh, I wish I could speak, could touch Brinder. Boom, there's Brinder. Now what fascinated me about this is that when Brinder died, she was 14 and a half years old. Her black had turned to gray. Her eyes had gone from bright and sparkly and shiny and alert to really cloudy and dull. And she developed doggy dementia. Her eyes were real droopy. Her ears were droopy. And she lost most of her muscle mass. In short, she was a typical old dog when she died. Well, when she came to me, she was gorgeous. She was bright and shiny. She was well muscled. Her eyes were bright and alert. They were shiny. And she was so happy. And she always used to lie on my stomach and put her chin under my chin. So here she comes, and I'm lying on my back. She puts herself on me, puts her chin under my chin. I'm so happy to see her. I reached out to touch her, just like I always did. And boom, I was about to go on a trip. The angels came up. They escorted me out of my body, and in fact, I got into the tunnel and went to heaven. So I was right when I said touching Brinder was like touching heaven. That's exactly where I went. So I got in the tunnel. I went to heaven, and I saw a number of different things. Before I talk about what I saw, I have to describe what it was like to leave, because that was so fascinating to me. My preconceived notion about death is that when you're done, you're done. When your heart and your lungs stop beating, you sort of just turn to dust. You cease to exist. And I was fascinated to find that as I left my body, I was still every bit of the person I am today. I had the same thoughts, the same feelings. All I was doing was leaving my body. And I have to tell you quite truthfully, I was very happy about that, because my body was causing me a lot of problems. It was dying, and I didn't want to die. I wanted to keep living. So when I left my body, it was really delightful to find that I was still present. And so I got into the tunnel without my body. I just left it. And I went to heaven. And when I got to heaven, it was absolutely wonderful. And I'm sure those of you who've been here before are used to hearing what heaven is like, and know that none of us really have any words to fully describe what it feels like. We just don't have the vocabulary here. But what I remember so clearly, and the best words I can use are, first of all, I say, think about the most wonderful or pleasurable experience that you've ever had in your entire life. And multiply that by infinity. It doesn't come close. It doesn't come close. That's the closest I can come to describing it. It doesn't come close. And I see Donna here nodding in agreement. It doesn't. But what it felt like, you're in a place of such total acceptance. You're at one with everything. There is love everywhere. You become part of the love and light. So it goes through you and you start emanating it. You are totally part of that. You are complete, everything is tranquil, everything is peaceful. There's no judgment anywhere. You are just part of the love and light. It was the most wonderful experience I've ever had in my entire life. And I never wanted to leave. I was shown a couple of things that I want to talk about while I was there. And one of the things that was fascinating to me is that I was shown a picture of the earth way far away. And I was shown millions and millions and millions of tiny silver cords. And I was made to understand that everything is connected to everything else, and that nothing happens by chance. Absolutely nothing happens by chance. And that was fascinating to me, absolutely fascinating. And the other thing that I came to understand is that it's all about love and relationships. That's why we're here. That every opportunity we have in this lifetime, every breath we take, every move we make, is all about, it's another opportunity for love and relationships. Nothing else matters. It doesn't matter what job you have, what car you have, what house, what you do, what church you go to. None of that matters. Those are all just vehicles for love and relationships. That's all that's important. And that sort of came as a shock to somebody who was a workaholic. It had an impact, believe me. So those were some of the things that I learned. And then nothing happens by chance. Absolutely nothing. You know how you say, oh, that was chance that happened, or oh, what a coincidence? Wrong. Nothing happens by chance or coincidence. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. So I was up there in heaven, and I loved it. Like all of you who have been there, it's the best place we've all ever been. And I didn't want to come back. And I really debated about it, and I thought, shoot, am I going to get asked to come back? Do I want to go back? I don't really want to go back. But I felt like my work wasn't done. Although at age 43, I couldn't have told you what my work was. But somehow I felt like it wasn't done. But I thought, gosh, if I asked to go back, and I go back, it'll probably be a long time before I return here, because my family, we live to be 100. And I was only 43. So do I really want to do this? And, I really just, do I not? Finally, I said, dear God, I don't want to go. In that I didn't want to keep going any further into heaven. Boom. I'm back in my body. So fast. I don't even remember going through a tunnel. I don't know how I got back in my body. I'm just back. And about 5 minutes later, the angels left, the golden light left, and my whole anaphylaxis was gone. I was done. So, before I talk about what happened then, I want to say something I should have said during this whole 5 or 6 hours, however long it was. My assistant medical director was holding my hand. And at the time that I realized that I was probably going to die, and that there's nothing anybody could do because they were just monitoring my vital signs and going to give me steroids, which was not going to be helpful. All I wanted was somebody to hold my hand on the way out the door. That's all I wanted. And that has profoundly changed the way I practice medicine. So that I literally and or physically hold the hands of my patients in ways that I didn't before. Because all I wanted was somebody to recognize my humanness, my humanity. I knew there was nothing anybody could do. They're all doctors. I had a whole herd of doctors in my room. There's nothing any of them could do. But the most important thing that they could do was to recognize my humanness and my uniqueness. And that was it. And just support me. That's all they had to do. So that single thing has profoundly changed the way I practice medicine. And I tell my residents that I believe that the most important thing that we as physicians, or really any healthcare professional, has to offer is not the specialized skills and knowledge that we bring to our practice. Those are important. We couldn't practice medicine without them. But I believe that what we bring in is the most important thing is our uniqueness and our ability with each patient to acknowledge and recognize them as individual, unique people. And to support them just in that way. Not as, the gallbladder in room, whatever. But it is a person who happens to have part of have an illness that has brought them to you. And that really, really profoundly changed the way I practice medicine and continues to do so to this day. So I wanted to mention that because it was a key for me. I mean, I really remember thinking, all I want is somebody to hold my hand on the way out the door. Because I'll tell you in a few minutes, I had an opportunity not many months later to put that practice, or that idea into practice, and I'll tell you about the results. It was really quite amazing. But anyway, back to me. So now I've come back from my near-death experience. It's about midnight, I think. It was the middle of the night sometime, and I feel fine. So I thought, great, it's only midnight. I can still go on a month vacation. They'll release me in a few hours, and I'll have a great time. So, you know, I was so naive. I thought I would go back to my same old life. You know, I thought I'd be the same old person going back to my same old life. And I was perfectly happy to do that. But it didn't happen that way. I was released. I'm not sure how many days later. I have very little recollection of the days that followed. But what clearly happened was I had a lot of medical problems as a result of having been given this drug incorrectly. The bottom line was, one day my allergist came to me and said, you know, you need to leave South Carolina or you're going to, quote, be found face down dead in the dirt. So, with all my medical problems, my sister and I had one suitcase in hand. I walked away from my job, my house, my land, my animals, my entire life as I knew it, and left. And I moved back to Colorado, not knowing, at that time I couldn't walk, not knowing if I would ever be able to work again, whether I'd ever have a job again, because jobs in my specialty were very hard to get, whether I'd ever see my animals again. Basically, my entire life I had just walked away from. And I had lost everything up to including my life. So I was really starting all over. At age 43, I've been a very successful professional, and I was considered the bright and rising star in my department. And I am all the way back at the beginning, starting over. And it was very interesting. I remember sitting on my sofa, on my dad's sofa in Colorado, which is my family home, and being really fairly unconcerned by all of this. And all I remember saying is, well, God, you know, you obviously put me back here for a reason. Tell me what you want to do and I'll do it. And that was it. I had no idea if I would work. I didn't know if I was supposed to be working. All I knew is that whatever God wanted me to do is what I'd be doing. And it was really very freeing. I was surprised. It was really quite a wonderful feeling. In spite of the disorientation, which John mentioned, I think, and I did feel very disoriented. I didn't know if I had one foot and felt like I had one foot here on earth and one foot in heaven, but either way, I was very happy to do whatever I was supposed to do. And interestingly enough, I had been told that there were two things I was coming back to do. I was told that I was supposed to, quote, talk about the angels, end quote, and I was told that I was supposed to, quote, help the animals, end quote. Wasn't told how to do it, where to do it, with whom to do it. Those were the only two things I was told to do. And frankly, at the time that I was recovering in Colorado, I didn't see how I could do those things because I couldn't even walk. And so, you know, I wasn't really worried about that. It was just, well, what am I supposed to do? What was interesting to me is that as a result of this experience, I didn't know if I would work. Before I even finished my rehabilitation, I was asked to interview at two places. And I had said that there were always two places I wanted to live. One was New England, the other was the Upper Midwest. I was offered ultimately a job at Yale and a job at the University of Wisconsin. And within that year, I was also asked to apply for a job at Minnesota and Iowa. All the places I'd always wanted to work, and over the 5 years prior to that, had never been able to get even an interview. So I thought this was sort of interesting. So I moved here to Wisconsin. And you know, I was still recovering. I still had not worked again. So I didn't know the ways in which this experience was going to change my life. But when I got back to the hospital and started working with patients, and actually, let me back up, even before that, people off the street, I swear, would come up and somehow we'd start talking about angels and God and my near-death experience. And I'm actually very much of an introvert, so I would not initiate these conversations. I'm way too shy. So it was fascinating to me, and it became clear very early on that one of my jobs, which was to talk about the angels, was going to be realized in this one-on-one conversations that I was having with people. And people wanted to know much of the same things from person to person. They wanted to know, where did my loved one go? what does it feel like? And sometimes they wanted to know were the experiences that they had had of seeing or talking to their deceased loved one, were they real or were they really going crazy? And I was able to reassure them that, when we make this transition, that it's really a wonderful place we go to, that if the person who's deceased comes back and talks with you, no, you're not crazy at all. And that, at least for me, once the angels came and the golden light came, I wasn't in pain anymore. I mean, I was in pain, but it didn't bother me. So essentially, I wasn't. And so making that transition ultimately was not a painful process. And where we go is so incredibly wonderful. And that has turned out to be the theme for my last 5 years, really, here at the University of Wisconsin. What happened was when I got back to the hospital, first of all, I realized I wasn't a workaholic anymore. And this posed somewhat of a problem for me because academic physicians work a lot of long hours and we're supposed to climb the academic ladder. And I wasn't interested in climbing the academic ladder anymore because it wasn't important. But what I was very interested in was talking with my patients about why they had the disease they had, what they thought, what the role was of the disease in their life. And I was amazed at the stories that I got from people talking about how the disease had changed their life, how they're a better person for it, even those who were chronically or terminally ill, which are most of the patients with whom I have interactions with. And it was really amazing. They felt that they wouldn't be the person they were without that disease, even if it was going to prove to be, quote, fatal. And I found myself wanting to spend a lot of time talking with people about that very issue, the role of disease in their life. And then they wanted to hear from me what it was like to go to heaven. So selectively, I would start talking with patients in the hospital about what this process was like. And people found it to be very helpful and very comforting. But I felt very strange doing that because here I'm an academic physician, and I'm a pathologist, which is the most scientific of all the specialties, and I'm talking about angels. And we can't, we have no studies to support the presence of angels. And yet they're there. They're real. They're everywhere. They're here, in fact. And so that was really odd, and I felt very strange and really uncomfortable. Not talking about angels, but doing it in that setting. And that is one of the struggles that I've had and continue to have is how does one who sees angels, continues to see angels, and sees golden light, how does one integrate that into the practice of traditional Western medicine in one of the most research-oriented institutions in this country? And is it a surprise that I was put there? Probably not. But that's proven to be really difficult. Because, as all of you probably know, traditional medicine does not support spirituality as part of the healing process. And when I came back, I finally understood the difference between curing patients, which is what I'm paid to do, and still do to the best of my ability, versus healing. Curing, you eliminate the symptoms, but healing, you get at the root cause. And I was really interested in healing, and still am, and recognized that, quote, death, or this transition we make, can sometimes be part of the healing process. And that set me apart from almost all of my colleagues, because in medicine we're taught that death is the enemy. That's who we fight. And of course, having been to heaven and knowing how wonderful heaven is, I don't see death as the enemy at all. It is simply part of the process. It is returning home. It is where we belong. And we're finally able to leave this body that at that point has become frail and very often painful and no longer useful for our soul. So how do I talk about that to my residents? It doesn't work very well. It still doesn't work very well. But those are the things that I've started bringing to my practice over these 5 years. And it's been very difficult. I have had to do it very selectively. But there are a few people who are interested. But I don't go around telling people I see angels in the hospital. I would end up in psychiatry, and not as a doctor. So those of you who see angels and see spirits and talk to these people, you're not crazy. You're not crazy at all. And one of my friends, who's just a wise woman that I've known since we were children, and she's a retired family practice doc, said, she responded for me one day when somebody asked me, well, Roby, why did you see angels? Of all the people on the face of this earth, you are the last person I would expect to see angels, because you are so grounded, so concrete, and so scientific. And her response, I'll never forget it, she said, that's why. Because when Roby tells you she saw angels, it's hard to say she didn't. So I believe, I don't know, but I mean, I do know for sure I was told to talk about angels, but I believe that the reason I was chosen or sent back here to do that is because it is hard for my medical colleagues to tell me I'm crazy. Because I'm a pathologist. If I were a psychiatrist, it would be a little easier. I'm thinking of my psychiatric colleagues. I love psychiatrists. But, they're just different. We're different, too, as pathologists, but we're different in a different way. Anyway, so, I am the most basic science of all the specialties, as I said. I am in a research institution. It is hard to tell me I'm crazy because I'm not. And my colleagues know that, and they don't know what to do with me because they can't dismiss me. So I think that's why I'm here to be the messenger. And so I have talked to hospice groups, I have talked to physicians, although I don't like talking to them, because it's very hard to talk to a hostile audience. But I will. I'll do whatever I'm asked to do because it's my job here. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the ways in which I hope we're changing medical practice. I had the opportunity to talk at an elective given by the medical school at the University of Wisconsin. And so I had about 20 minutes to talk about my near-death experience. And I was asked to focus on the ways that it changed the practice of medicine. So I thought that's what I was going to do. I wrote all my notes, like I always do. And then, as I always do, I prayed before I got up to talk. And I talked to my angels and I said, I ask that I say and do and am the things that would be for the highest good of my audience. That's what I always ask for, because I'm just a messenger. And then I got up and talked, and much to my surprise, I spent most of my time talking about the actual near-death experience itself. And I thought, oh my God, this is just, this is so far out. These folks are really going to be freaked out. And I think probably a lot of them were because they didn't ask me back the next year. But this is what I found so fascinating. 2 students came up and talked to me, and they weren't supposed to talk to any of the speakers, but they did anyway. And the first one said, she said, were you religious before this experience? And I said, no. I told you that at the beginning. I was not religious, but I am very spiritual now. She said, well, she said, if you were very religious before your NDE, I could account for everything you said on the basis of your religion. But since you said you're not religious, I don't know what to think of this now. She said, I'm going to have to rethink this entire topic. I said, great. I've achieved my goal, because as you go back and think this whole topic over again and answering the questions that you're asking, you will be better prepared to answer your patient's questions. And then the second woman came up and said to me, I had a loved one die about 3 years ago, and I didn't know what happened to them. And I've really been unsettled. I didn't know if they were in pain when they died. I didn't know where they went. I swear sometimes that person has come back, and I've been talking to them, and I'm wondering if I'm crazy. And she said, but you have made me feel at peace. And I said, wonderful. I have achieved my other goals. So I believe that the 2 reasons I've been put back when I talk about the angels are to help people find comfort, for one, and to help educate my medical colleagues. And what I tell them is that I don't care if you believe in near-death experience or not. It doesn't matter to me. But what I think is valuable are the lessons that I have learned from that experience, that I believe we can apply to all of our lives, and all of us who are healthcare professionals can apply to our work. And those are the things that I really stress when I'm talking to people. Now, what are some other things I've learned? Remember I told you I learned about holding somebody's hand, and that a few months after my near-death experience, I had behind me the vital sign monitors, and he said, every time you hold her hand, her blood pressure, which was in the 220s over 100 and something, very, very high, would drop almost into the normal range. And he had seen this happen repeatedly, which is why he finally brought it to my attention. So for my scientific brain, this was wonderful affirmation of what I'd learned from my near-death experience. And so that was really the start of my integrating these non-scientific things that I had learned with all of my science. And I remembered that. Hold people's hands. And so I still do that. One of the other things that I had learned, I told you, was that everything's about love and relationships. It's all about love and relationships. It's not about being judgmental or angry or anything else. It's just about opportunities to love. And several years after this experience, about 3 years later, I had an opportunity to do. I said, I'm not going to do, I'm going to be. I'm going to be present and to support her in whatever she chooses to do. You know, Ron Roth, some of you may be familiar with Ron Roth, he says, you know, we're not doings, we're beings. We're here to be. And let me digress for a second. I actually now have my to-do list and my to-be list. So, just for whatever that's worth. So anyway, back to my sister. So that was an instant recognition that I had made some major changes. Somebody who's been focused on doing and goals their entire life, I had made a transition to learning to be. And to recognize that more important than anything I could ever do was who I could be. And so I went to support my sister in whatever she chose to do. And when I got off the phone with my dad, before I made my airline reservations, I asked the angels, is my sister going to go or is she going to stay? And I was given the most beautiful image. It was two multi-story angels in full wings and white, because they come in all different ways. But these were two who made a decision as to whether she was going to stay or go. So that was fine. I was just wanted to know. So I went to visit her, and for 4 days and nights, I held her hand. And that's primarily what I did. I held her hand. And I supported her in whatever she wanted to do. And once again, when I was arriving, I asked the angels, when I got to the airport, before I went to the hospital, I said, how is my sister? They showed me the same image. Once again, two huge angels holding her in their arms between heaven and earth. So I knew that she was still alive, and yet still hadn't made her decision. So I went, and as I said, I held her hand for 4 days. And I was really amazed and pleased at the fact that I could just support her. Because when I listened to other family members talk about their anger, because you know, people with substance abuse, and some of you may have had this experience, they lie, cheat, steal, not dependable. It's very hard to interact with folks like that. But I was able to tap into the core, and I kept saying, but at heart, this is a kind, caring, compassionate, loving person. It's just that all those drugs got all that messed up. But the core is still there. And because of my near-death experience, I was able to connect with that core. And forget all that superficial stuff, because remember, it's all about love and relationships. It's not about all that superficial stuff. And drug abuse, as devastating as that can be, is superficial stuff when you get right down to it. It's all about love and relationships. Well, my sister ultimately did pass away. And I supported her along the whole process, just as I had. And I didn't have the anger that I saw in a lot of my family members. So that told me once again that I'd learned more about being. And I'd learned about love and relationships. And it's an ongoing process. I'm not telling you I have it all memorized yet, because I don't. But it was fascinating from God. Anyway, so I wanted to know, because I could just see her. The angel was coming for her saying, nope, I'm not going to go. I refuse. It would be so typical. So I wanted to make sure she got there. You know, I'm the oldest sister. It's my job to take care of my siblings. So I talked to a friend of mine who could talk to people who passed on. And it was a very fascinating conversation. She said, you know, I'm doing well. I'm in school. I've learned a lot of things. And she told me some of the things that she had learned. And they were so specific that I knew that this communicator was not making them up. Couldn't have made them up. So that was fascinating to me. And she also said, and I'll never forget, she said, I'm going to be your guardian angel now. And I already knew I had one. I said, great. Because, you know, my sister was so streetwise. And I'm not, because I spent my whole life in school. So I said, wonderful. Because, you know, nobody could pull anything over on my sister. So that was great. So I thought that would be the end of the conversation. And, oh, and she also said one other thing. She said, tell Dad that I'm okay and I love him. And I thought, oh, good. How am I going to do this? You know, my dad, who doesn't believe in God, doesn't believe in angels, but it already sort of been primed because I'd already seen angels. So I called him up and I said, Dad, Ann said to tell you she loves you and she's doing fine. Silence. Okay, whatever. So I thought, well, I delivered the message. I did what I'm supposed to do. And, you know, and that's fine. We all learn at different rates, and I understand it. So I thought I was done with my sister, right? Because I talked through this communicator. So a few weeks later, I'm getting some Reiki work done. Because I'm supposed to be writing a manuscript, and I'm having a hard time getting it written because of my sister's recent passing. So I'm lying on the table. Oh, before I even do that, I'm talking to this lady, and my sister comes in as the spirit and says, tell the Reiki master I'm going to help her. I said, okay, Leanne. That was my sister. I said, okay. So I told the Reiki master, my sister's here. She's going to help you. Okay. So I'm lying on the table, and she's doing this Reiki, and my sister is overhead, and she's spinning. There's 7 plates over my head, like ceramic, dinner-sized plates, and she's spinning them. And I'm looking up there and thinking, what are you doing? And so I asked her, I said, Leanne, what are you doing? Don't bug me. I'm busy. I'm working. So typical of my sister. So that wasn't helpful. I still didn't know what she was doing. So I started asking the Reiki master about what she was doing, and finally I said, okay, look, let me tell you something. Here's what my sister's doing, and I have no idea what this is. She just got really quiet. And then she said, that's advanced energy work. You're not supposed to know about that. I said, well, my sister's up there doing it right now. So it was fascinating to me to start to understand that this transition we make is just that. It's a transition, but it's a continuum. You know, we're not dead. We just make a transition from the soul inside a body to a soul without a body. But she was every bit my wonderful, amazing, unique sister in heaven as she was here on earth. In fact, better, because now she'd gotten rid of the substance abuse. And now she was back to her core self. And she was helping me out. You know, she said she was going to be my guardian angel. So it was a wonderful time for me to experience that connection with her and to really understand in a new way that this is truly all a continuum. And that's something that I've shared with my patients selectively. Because again, you know, a doctor's saying they talk to dead people, that's really pretty weird. So my sister and I have had a number of conversations. And for me, it has been very, very comforting. It's been very enlightening. There have been a number of times she said, Roby, you need to do blah, blah, blah. For your education, you need to do blah, blah, blah. And so, okay, Leanne, I'll do that. And so those of you who see or hear spirits or get guidance like that, hopefully you understand and know that there's nothing wrong with that. It's very positive. It's perfectly, I see it as perfectly normal. And that's what I try to impart to my patients. What are some of the other experiences that I've had? Well, often people say to me, you know, I really would like to have the same level of spirituality that you've had, but I don't want to have a near-death experience to do it. I don't recommend it. So how can I get that? And I tell them a story. It was the first time that I saw angels after I came back from my near-death experience. Because remember, I'd not seen angels before that. And I, of course, naively assumed that I saw my 2 angels over my bed. That was the last time I'd be seeing angels. Huh, wrong. So I was in my barn. I have a barn, a 50-acre farm. And I was in there shoveling manure, happily shoveling manure. And all of a sudden, this angel appears to me. Now, I'm only about 6 months out of my near-death experience. Still wondering, was that real? And this angel comes to me. She's about 2 feet high. She's carved out of white stone. Her wings are at her side, and she looks like she stepped right off of a tombstone. Now, this was really important because I wouldn't have believed it was an angel if it didn't look like one. So there she is, hovering in my stall. So I said to her, very, very carefully and quickly, I said, hi, who are you? How are you? Who sent you? What do you have to tell me? And the angel stands there, quietly. Pretty soon she says, I'll be back when you can be quiet. And what I learned and what I tell people is, if you want to hear the message, you have to be quiet. And that's what I learned. I had to be quiet if I wanted to hear the message. And so people don't have to have a near-death experience to hear the message, but they have to create that quiet, calm space inside of themselves in order to hear the message. I have seen angels many times since then, in all sorts of forms and varieties, and now, you know, I'm much more comfortable with that, so they don't have to come to me looking like our conception of an angel. And I want to talk about angels for a minute. First of all, I want to thank all of the angels in my life. I want to thank all of the angels who are here today. And I want to encourage people to talk with their angels. We all have a guardian angel. Furthermore, we all have angels around us all the time. And they are here today, and they asked me, they said, we want to be recognized. So I hereby want to recognize all the angels who are here to help us and be with us today. And I wouldn't be where I am today without them. They've helped me in countless ways. And how have they helped me? Well, they've helped me because I talk with them every day. Sometimes I get responses, sometimes I don't. But what I want to make sure everybody knows is that you can always ask your angels for help. They're with us all the time, but they do not intervene because we have free will. And so they will only intervene if you ask for their help. And the first time I realized this was something very trivial. And people have asked me, well, does it have to just be important things? I thought it had to be something really, an emergency or something just critical. No, it can be something every day, ordinary. So here's what happens. So funny. I'm such a slow learner. I was driving to work and I was late, as usual, because one of the things that happened to me after my near-death experience is that I have no concept of time. Because there is no time in heaven. So I came back and I have no sense of time. So I'm driving to work, I'm late as usual, and at a typical medical institution, there's no parking. So I just sort of rhetorically said, oh, Angels, I sure wish I could find a parking spot today. And I'd like one, that's within 5 minutes of the front door. Not the front door, but the north door. Now, it was 9 o'clock in the morning, and after 8:30, you cannot find a parking spot in that lot, period. I've done it many times. You can't. They aren't there. So I drive in, and I start to circle around once, like I always do, just to confirm that, yes, there's still no parking spots. And a car pulls out. I think, wow, this is my lucky day. And then another one pulls out, and then another one, and 5 cars pulled out. And I said, okay, Angels, I get the message. I get the message. It was so funny. So the parking angels were at work. And I have used them. In fact, at Madison Nines, we joke because people will say, where'd you park? Oh, I parked, right where I asked. I just asked my angels and got the spot that I asked for. And so we do that all the time. But I have also asked the angels, actually every day I ask the angels when I go to work. I ask the angels to help me and for Spirit to help me with each and every patient that I'm dealing with every day. And sometimes when things are really critical or a patient's in a lot of pain, I will ask their angels to please help them, to ease their transition, to help the family feel more comfort with what's happening. So I don't use it just for simple things like parking, but my point is that they are here to help us all the time in all parts of our lives, but we must ask. If you don't ask, you won't receive. You have to ask. And if you do, they will respond. But let me tell you, they have a great sense of humor. They are funny. As the one who told me that she'd be back when I could be quiet. So be prepared if you talk to them that you may get what you ask for, or something else that's even for a higher good, and they do have a sense of humor. They can just be hilarious. Let me look at my list and see what other things I want to talk with you about. Oh yeah, a couple of other things related to medicine. Ways that it's changed the way I practice medicine. Besides asking for help before I see each and every patient, and then getting that help, which is wonderful. And I will also tell you, I teach residents, that's part of my job, and medical students. It's very hard to explain when somebody says, well, Dr. Rogers, how did you know to ask that question? Or, how did you know that? Well, the angel told me. I don't say that. But it's true. But I do that. And I see angels in the hospital. And I see the golden light sometimes. And when I talk about the practice of medicine, it's really become very difficult for me to practice medicine and turn all of that off. And yet it's frustrating at the same time because so many of my friends say, it's people like you that we really need in medicine. People who can integrate mind, body, and spirit. But those of us who try to do that really pay a price. So I guess what I'm asking is for people to be patient. It's going to take a while before the system changes enough that I think this becomes commonplace, where doctors routinely look at people from the standpoint of mind, body, spirit connection. It'll happen, but it's tough. And those of us who are in the field right now trying to do this, and probably many of you in the audience may be trying to do it, it is difficult because the system is so rigid still. So while I talk to the angels in the hospital, and while I see angels in the hospital, I don't routinely talk about it, and it is very schizophrenic not to do that. For example, one day I was called emergently into the intensive care to do a procedure on a patient who had been healthy a few minutes before and then had been given a medication and had basically died. And there, you know, the room, of course, was filled with tons of doctors. And as I walked in, I realized the room was filled with golden light. And I couldn't see angels, but I could feel their presence because I could feel the love. And so I'm just standing there in awe, like this, and everybody else around me is talking like nothing's happening. And it was a very funny feeling because I thought, how can they not see this? How can they not feel what's happening? So while I have had these experiences and while I incorporate them into my own practice of medicine, I'm trying to give you a sense of how difficult it can be when you're working in an academic setting. But rest assured, the angels are there. So, you know, it will change. It's just going to take some time. Another thing that I learned from my near-death experience was to be fully present. And it comes back to holding people's hands. When I hold their hand, I am fully present. I am acknowledging them as unique human beings. And again, I can't say enough times, that's the thing that I think is the most important thing to do, and the thing that I have learned that from my near-death experience. And so that's something else that I practice no matter where I go. But I don't talk about the angels. I sometimes see people's souls that have risen from their body. I don't talk about that, but yet they happen. And let me talk about souls for a little bit, for those of you who may have seen this. At least in my experience, when people or animals, it doesn't matter, when any of us make our transition, the soul usually leaves, at least in my experience, a little bit before the heart and lungs stop. Sometimes a lot. And I've observed this most frequently with the animals that I have on my farm. Many of whom are rescued, they've been abused, they might be elderly, disabled, etc. When the soul leaves, usually it leaves in one of two ways. You may either feel sort of a whoosh sound and feel, almost like there's been a vacuum created and then air moves into that, or you may see all these tiny little sparkles as the soul leaves the body. Sometimes the soul leaves the body and it's instantly gone. Other times when the soul leaves the body, it will stay around for a while. And particularly in the dogs that I have helped make the transition, often because they're so connected to me, they will hang around and I'll see their soul. And what I have done that's really been helpful, and finally after 5 years my vet has finally gotten comfortable with this, is that I will tell the animals, I will say, get in the tunnel and go toward the light. The angels will help you, go toward the light. And I do that repeatedly. And it's the same for, I've seen that with humans, I've seen it with hawks, I've seen it with dogs and cats and goats. It's the same process no matter what. And so what I tell people, well, not so much human people, but animal people, is I talk to them about this process. And that to me is practicing medicine in an everyday way. And so when I have an animal even who's about to make the transition, I'll talk to them and I'll say, you know, heaven is wonderful. When you get to heaven, you're going to be able to run and jump and eat again and play with all your toys. Your friends will be there. And if they've had friends who've already passed on, I'll describe their friends. And then I'll tell them, you know, I have asked so-and-so to come back, or I've asked the angels to help you. And, you know, when this happens, it's time for your transition. I want you to get in the tunnel, go toward the light. And then a friend of mine said, well, you know what you should be doing? After that, you should ask them to send you a sign that they got there, much like my sister. Did you get there? And because I want to make sure, because, you know, sometimes they come out and hover. And I've had animals who've hovered for a long time, and I've had to say, especially one of my dogs, Zachy, go get in the tunnel. Get in the tunnel, go to the light. He didn't want to leave. Get in the tunnel, go to the light. You'll see your sister. And in fact, I want to tell you the story about Zachy. It was really very heartwarming, and I think it speaks to the largeness of what this experience has to offer. There's so much that we're just beginning to touch about consciousness and who we are and what happens to a soul. And Zachy was 14. He just had his birthday 2 days before. He developed congestive heart failure when I came home in the afternoon. And I've already been talking to him for a number of weeks, because I knew he was getting close, about what was going to happen, and his sister, who was very close, who had passed over a year before. So I said, you know, I've asked Sadie when it's time to come back and help you get in the tunnel and go to heaven. So that afternoon, my vet comes to the house and gives him the euthanasia solution, and he doesn't die. keep talking to him. Zachy, it's time to go. Sadie, angels, please help him. Get in the tunnel, go toward the light. So he gets another solution. Still doesn't go. And I said, Zachy, it's time to go. You've got to go. Get in the tunnel, go toward the light. And so I called in all of his angels, I called in his sister, and, you know, I'm talking about angels and his dead sister right in front of my veterinarian, who's even more science-oriented than I am. But she's learned that I do this, and so she's getting more comfortable. And finally, I felt his soul lift up, about 18 inches off of his body, and stay there for what seemed like eternity. Now, he still hadn't left. His heart and lungs still hadn't stopped. So I kept saying, Zachy, get in the tunnel, go toward the light. Pretty soon, his soul floats off, and his heart and lungs stop, and Zachy's gone. Well, I'd asked him before this to send me a sign when he got to heaven so that I would know he was safe. But I forgot. So I went up, and I live slightly off the farm, and I always bury my animals on the farm. So I took Zachy's body up to the farm, and I put it on a little toboggan, and I have to pass through a paddock and a pasture, and then I go to the pond. Well, this is in the middle of the day. It's just so amazing. I love this story because we think sometimes that animals don't know what are going on. And I tell this story because I think animals are so spiritual. So I have Zachy, and he's not covered. And, you know, he looks like he's sleeping. He's on the little toboggan. We get into the paddock area by my barn. And my ponies are in a pen close by. And they can see us. We're at the top of the hill. They are at the bottom of the hill, the far end of their pen, and they're eating. Those of you who have ever had ponies know that that's what ponies do. They eat all the time. It's their main job in life is to eat. So they stopped eating. They walked up the hill and they stood at the fence. Just standing. There's no food there. And I opened the gate, we walked through, and they stood there the whole time I took Zachy by. Just standing. Once we got by, they left and went back to eating. Well, then I have like 8 goats or so, and they were in the middle of that same paddock taking a sun bath. Now, any of you who know goats, they are curious about everything, they want to eat everything, and they always like to butt each other. They're very active, and they talk a lot. So we go a little farther and pull the toboggan with Zachy on it, and all my goats who've been sleeping in the sun stand up as a group. They turn around, they line up and face us, and just stand there as we go by. They don't make a noise. They don't come to investigate. They don't butt each other. They don't talk. They don't try to, eat my clothes. They just stand there in silence and watch us go by. And then I had a black cat who'd been following us the entire time. And the black cat continues to follow us as we go through that paddock into another pasture where I have sheep. And the sheep were at the other end of the pond. They got up, walked over, 6 in a row, stood in a line, and didn't move until we went by. And I thought, wow, I feel like I've just, watched this funeral procession. All of these animals saying their goodbyes to this dog. I was just flabbergasted. Because there's no way it could have been chance. I could buy any one of those groups maybe doing that, but not all of them. So I bury Zachy, and I think my day is done. Late that night, all of a sudden, I'm in the house, I get this wonderful vision. There's Zachy, and he was paralyzed from the waist down when he finally passed away. There he is, and he is sitting there, beautiful. He was 14, all his muscles have come back, he can sit up, which he couldn't do before, his eyes are bright, and his sister is sitting right next to him. She also had the same problem, paralyzed, actually up to her diaphragm when she passed away. And she is bright-eyed, she's sitting next to him, and I could feel the love from his heart, because he had never gotten over the death of his sister. And as I'm looking at them, she starts running diagonally toward me, enticing him to run after her. And for a minute I'm thinking, and the other thing I saw was, it looked like I was looking at Zachy through a fine piece of cloth, so everything was just a little bit hazy, and I thought, gosh, what's wrong with my vision? And then I realized, well, that's what spirits look like. And I realized Zachy had sent me the message I had asked for. I had asked to know that he was safely in heaven. So once again, I have confirmation that once one gets to heaven, you are completely regenerated. everything is perfect again, and everything is healed. And it was so moving to me. And I told my vet the next day, I was reluctant because she's so scientific, but I was so compelled to tell her because she's really, really close to my animals. And she was just in tears. And then she related to me, now scientific as she is, about a similar experience that she had had with one of her very old horses that she'd been very close to. Now, one of the things I've discovered about this near-death experience is I share these, what seem to be sort of odd experiences, is that in truth, a lot of us have had something like this happen, but hardly anybody wants to talk about it for fear of being thought crazy. And so my job is to, quote, talk about the angels. And so I talk about these things for that very reason. And, you know, what that taught me, once again, is that there's spirituality in all of us. We're all connected. We're all important. And nothing happens by chance. All the things that I had heard about in the beginning, when I had my near-death experience. And as I continue this journey now through 6 years, I understand and have put into practice more every day the understanding that everything we do affects everything else. Remember I told you how I saw the earth and I saw all the silver cords and everything was connected? When I first came back, I was afraid to even walk on the grass. I thought, oh my gosh, you know, everything's connected. Nothing happens by chance. If I step on this grass, am I going to harm it? What effect will that have? And it was just really crazy. But what I have understood is that if I move my arm, the whole world changes because everything's connected. So I am very careful about my interactions in the grocery store, my interactions with the patients, my interactions with the animals, my thoughts, because I understand that I'm important. We're all important, all of us, every single creature, every rock, everything. It's all connected. The moon, the stars, the earth, the people, the plants, the animals, the dust, the dirt, the rocks. We're all connected. And we all make a difference. So every action, every thought that all of us have is important. Because since everything's connected, when we have a thought or we have an action, it shifts everything. We may not see that. We may not see it today, we may not see it tomorrow, we may not see it in our lifetime. But be assured, we all make a difference. Thank you.
You are.
Well, thank you. I will. Questions?
20 minutes.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi. When you talk to angels or spirits, do you talk out loud or do you talk in your head? Both? Both. Use the microphone.
The question was, when I talk to angels, do I talk out loud or in my mind? And the answer is I do both. Whatever is convenient. Sometimes if I'm in a meeting or something, I can't talk out loud. But rest assured, I have asked the angels to help me in medical meetings. There are times it's appropriate. So I do that silently, but nevertheless I do it. Either way, it doesn't matter, they hear. Pardon me. I've been told that it's more powerful if you talk out loud, but in my experience, that they hear, they seem to hear more the intent rather than the actual speech.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, ma'am?
When you speak of seeing angels, if you believe in angels and you talk to angels and you have experiences, is it on another level where you can see angels? Is that an evolution like? Does that come later to an individual, or explain that?
Oh, well, the question is, to sort of paraphrase if I'm getting this correctly, when I see angels, does that occur because of evolution? Sort of I've evolved to that point. Is that correct?
Well, yes. In other words, for let's say us or myself, I believe in angels. I talk to them. I've never seen one.
Have you asked for help?
Yes.
Did you get it?
Yes, but I don't I don't see the angel.
I'm
just wondering, do I need to go deeper, further?
Yeah, so her question was, she's talked to angels, she's gotten response when she's asked the angels does she need to go deeper to see them? My answer is no. If it works, because you're connecting with the angels. I happen to see them, but I don't always. Sometimes I just feel them. Sometimes it's neither. Something shifts. So if whatever works for you, great. You don't have to see them. I think the reason that I see them is because I am such a skeptic, and I'm so concrete that if I hadn't seen them, I never would believe they existed.
But it's so nice that you can see.
Oh, I love it. It's wonderful. But you know what? Now that I'm more comfortable, I see them less frequently. I feel them often. I still sometimes see them, but not always. And it's not, certainly, I don't feel like it's necessary. So I think, the way I answered it to the same friend of mine that I've known most of my childhood, she said she was really envious too. I said, Stephanie, you don't need to because you understand. You already believe and know that this is true. I am a true skeptic. I didn't know or believe until it was shown to me. And so I had to see them, otherwise I never would believe it. Yes, ma'am?
When you first got to heaven, did you see someone, who did you see, and did you have a conversation? And the second question is, are there different levels of heaven?
There are two questions. The second question was, are there different levels of heaven? And the first question was, did I see anybody, and who did I see? Oh, have a conversation with them. To answer the second question first, my understanding is that there are different levels. I didn't see different levels. Just like I didn't have a life review, because I think I wasn't gone that long in our time. But from everything I've read and other folks who've had NDEs, there are definitely different levels. I just did not experience them. Did I have a conversation? Who did I see? I saw the angels. I felt the presence of God, but didn't see a figure or a person that I could define as God, but the presence is unmistakable. It's unlike anything I'd experienced either here or in heaven. Did I have a conversation? Yes, but not exactly in words. Some of it was in pictures, some of it was in emotion, some of it was almost like people put thoughts into my head, and I knew they weren't mine. Because remember, I wasn't religious. What I might have said or not said is that I wasn't spiritual either. I just wasn't interested. I had a great life, and I liked it. So I knew that these things were not my thoughts because I wasn't spiritual. Yes, ma'am?
I know you weren't gone very long, but when you looked back at the earth and you saw silver cords, you meant silver cords around the earth.
No. Connecting, not around, but connecting everything.
From the universe to the earth, or just?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So my question is, did you have any insight about the relevance of the earth and this physical plane we're in relative to the rest of the universe?
The question was, did I have any insight into the relevance of the earth compared with the rest of the universe? And the answer is no, I didn't, except that it was darn insignificant.
What was the earth?
The earth was darn insignificant. Yeah, I mean, because what's truly important is love and relationships, so everything pales and is insignificant compared to that.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Are your angels able to help you diagnose different physical conditions in your patients?
The question is, are my angels able to help me diagnose physical conditions in my patients? And the answer to that is, I don't know. I have never specifically asked my angels to make a diagnosis. I mean, what I ask for instead is that they help me to know the truth, to be able to say and do and be the things that would be for my patient's highest good. Because I figure I am ultimately not the one who knows what is for their highest good. And so I don't look at it from a diagnostic standpoint. I am really looking at it from a spiritual standpoint of their highest good. I figure in my own little brain, I'm paid to make the diagnosis. And I ask for help in that, but not specifically what is the diagnosis of this patient. I don't ask that. Yes, ma'am?
Do you make less money now, or are you own fewer things than you did before?
Well, actually, I make a lot more money, and I have a bigger farm, but fewer things. And it's an interesting story about that. I actually went into the chair of my department one time because what I had wanted to do is simplify my life and have a more balanced life. And being in the life of an academic physician is basically all work. That's why I was a workaholic, and I liked it. But since I've come back, I want more balance. And so I actually went in him and said, I'd like to work less. I ended up working less and being paid more. And I didn't ask for it. But I simply asked the angels before I went in, here's what I would like, or something better if it is for my highest good, and that's what came out. I got even more time off and more money. And I didn't ask for either one of them. Yes, ma'am?
Two questions. Would you expound a little more on the silver cords and what's connected to what? Because I think some...
Everything's connected. Like, what I saw was the earth, really far away, and I saw silver cords connecting every person, every rock, every animal with everything else. It was the ultimate grid, basically.
And then the other question, you said that you got word, the guidance that the two things you were supposed to do when you came back was talk about the angels and help the animals.
Yes.
And would you expound more on how you see helping the animals? I mean, you explained about your own animals, but...
The question was, would I say more about the two ways that I was told to help? Well, specifically, I was told to help the animals, so she asked me to talk more about that. Yes. All of my life, I have rescued animals, primarily dogs. I love animals. About 2000 or 2001, I saw a need in my area for an equine rescue organization, so I started one, and I have been funding it through my salary as a physician. I rescue and rehabilitate horses that can be rehabilitated and retrained, and then they are rehomed. Those that cannot be stay with me for life as part of my sanctuary. I do no advertising, but the horses find me. And again, it is my belief and understanding that those who need to find me will. My focus on those who come to me is to provide or create an environment in which they can heal physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And so that they can learn to be the person that they choose to be. I use person generically. They got 4 legs, but they're still individuals. And so that's what I do. So it's a very different kind of sanctuary. And through the years, various horses have come. Some have gone on to new homes. In fact, my favorite story probably is about a pony, small pony like this, named Bagel, because people who named him said he looked like a toasted bagel. And he had a very hard life. I don't know who owned him originally, but someone had rescued him twice. Last time from a junkyard. He came to me at age 20 with some health problems, which I knew of, and I expected to have him for life because he couldn't be ridden. He never opened his heart to anybody. He wasn't an unkind pony, but you could brush him and pet him and love him and kiss him and pet him, and no response, nothing. I said, fine, that's just Bagel. That's his choice. I will still be here to support him through the rest of his life. And about, how many months ago? December, thank you. December of 2002, he was adopted by a lovely couple in northern Illinois who are veterinarians, and they're small animal vets, and they wanted a companion for their 32-year-old blind full-size horse. Now Bagel has always been the guide. He's always been the horse in my herd who watches out for everybody else. Okay? He doesn't have a single friend in the herd. He's the bottom of the pack, but he always, if anybody's sick, you'll always find Bagel watching over him. That's his job. He is the watch pony. And all of my animals have gotten to be healthy, and so he had no job. So he volunteered. He said he'd like to go. So he went, and I thought, fine. And I told the people, I said, you know, you can pat him, you can love him, but he never shows any emotion. We get there. He hops out of the truck, the trailer, and he runs back to the barn. I mean, runs. Now, he'd never been there before. He runs back to the barn. And I thought, well, this is unusual. And he's circling and, carrying on. But I thought, well, he's just excited. And like I said, first the woman holds him by the lead rope. And he's his usual self, just compliant and all that, but no heart. Then the husband picks up the lead rope. He looks up at that guy. I swear, I could just see him just melt. And I said, how wonderful. At age 24, he's finally found his person. So that's what I do with rescue. It's a different kind of rescue. And that's what I'm looking for, is for the animal to become all of who they can be. So clearly, I was the caretaker for 4 years for him. So that's what I do. Yes, sir.
Yeah, back to people.
Yeah.
You had given us a disclaimer about not promoting any particular religious tradition.
Yep.
And you did mention hearing the voice, getting the message in silence. Is there anything you can say about that to elaborate? Any advice you could give about meditation practices or whatever?
The question was, can I give any advice about meditation practices to get that place of silence? And the answer is I really can't. I am what I would call reluctantly spiritual. I'm still reluctantly spiritual. I have become spiritual to try to understand my near-death experience, but I don't have a lot of those kinds of practices. So unfortunately, I can't. I'm sorry. Any other questions? Yes, sir, way up there.
In many traditions, not all the spirits are benign.
Yes.
We have managed, I think, to basically cull to a very, very benign group of angels. Have you had any experience with any of the other types?
The question was, have I had any experience with spirits or angels who are not benign? In other cultures, that can be the case. The answer is yes, I have, and it's not fun. I have. Most of them are positive, but some have not been. And those I have asked to leave.
Could you elaborate?
So this gentleman asked if I could elaborate. Yes, let me just think here for a second. I've had spirits want to come in and enter my body and do harm, and I have asked them to leave. Oh, various circumstances. I could be meditating. A few times I have done that, which is part of why I don't do that anymore. Doing various sorts of, not even practices. Sometimes I can just be walking along the road. And so what I have done when that happens, and I realize I've gotten much better over the years at discerning who's a friend and who isn't a friend. And one thing I do is that every morning I ask that any negative energy or entity simply not be allowed to come into my space. And if they do get in, which they're not supposed to, but if they do, I ask them to leave. If that is not sufficient, I bring in big guns. Archangel Michael, I bring in Jesus and Mary, I bring in God's love and light, and then simply ask them, not doing them any harm, ask them to go to the love and light. But yes, that has happened. Any other questions? Just a second, yes ma'am.
I'm just wondering, I've always wondered, what's the purpose of individuals being at different levels in their life where, for instance, I'm speaking of myself and my sister, I, at a very early age, have always kind of looked within, and my sister's the total opposite where she's very materialistic, and I just came back from their house in Arizona where they have a $2 million house, but they're still very angry people, and I wonder, why do people develop so differently, and do they get a spiritual awareness on their deathbed, or do they come again if they don't succeed, or I guess I worry about her because I feel like she's gonna, and this is weird that I'm here because during the whole time I was reading this book called, I'm so bad with my memory, but something about wholeness and talking about medicine and healing the spirit, and it's wild for me to be here and listen to you about that, because that's what it's saying, that people who don't listen to their inner selves, finally an illness will come to make them listen, and that's why the illnesses come sometimes, and I'm worried that something's going to happen to her, and we were not very close, and it just kind of saddens me,
So the question, to sort of paraphrase that or put it in just a couple bullet points, is asking about people, in this case 2 siblings, who are at different spiritual levels, and wondering, will something happen to the person who is still materialistic, still has sort of, quote, not gotten the message, or what we might consider the message. I don't pretend to know everything. I can tell you a few things from reading it from my own experience. We as souls come here, put on earth in this body to learn certain things. We have certain lessons. And we have many, many, many opportunities to learn those lessons. When we learn those, we choose new lessons to come in. So sometimes people can look like they're not getting their lesson. Like my sister, for example, who had 30-some years of drug abuse, lied, cheated, stole, all that kind of stuff. And I often ask her, what was her soul lesson? Why did she come here? And did she learn what she came here to get? And without sharing the specifics, I finally understand that that life, which appeared to be so awful to me, served her purpose. And so, it's not always apparent to us, and sometimes the most, quote, spiritual lives may, let me rephrase that, we come to learn different things. And so one cannot judge by the look of somebody's life whether or not their soul is learning the lesson they came to learn.
That helps, because that way, you know, I don't just judge it from the outside, I guess, then.
Right, it's all about love. It's all about love. Yes, ma'am.
Two questions. One is, how can you recognize or know if an angel is not benign? If, I don't want to say evil, but especially if they're in the guise of doing good. How do you recognize it? And then I have
The question was, how do you recognize an angel who is not benign, even if they're in the guise of doing good? Angels, in my experience, always feel like love and light. And they always will do things that are for your highest good. Anytime a spirit or entity or angel wants to do something that isn't for your highest good, or forms any kind of judgment, or wants you to do something that is going to harm someone or something else, that is not positive energy. That is not something that's come from God, where we just talked about, or I just talked about, where it's all about love and light and relationships. So that's really the key. If it's not all about love, it's not a positive entity of any kind.
And then the other thing is, when you said everything we do affects everything else.
Yes.
Am I taking it to an extreme if I'm asking if everyone sitting here in this room is affecting every murder that's happening, every baby that's being born, every, I don't really understand what you're saying.
So the question was, once again, if everything's affecting everything else, are all of us sitting here in this room affecting every baby that's born, every murder that's occurring, et cetera, et cetera? That's a really good question, and I can tell you that that's simply what I saw. Does that mean we're causing? Effect is not necessarily the same thing as causing. But what I'm saying is that, let me use an example. This work. Well, let me try to answer your question, then I'll give you an example that might help. But it's all about the fact that everything we do shifts everything, and so it's sort of like dominoes. But it doesn't mean that I caused somebody else's murder, or I had something to do with a baby being born. But what I do today may affect one of you, which may mean that maybe you go out and write a book as a result of this talk today, or you do something else, or wanting people to understand that we don't operate in a vacuum, that not being as concrete and literal as what you're describing, because I can't answer that question. But let me talk about a true story that I think talks about the, it sort of gets to what you're getting at, or what you're asking indirectly. Do we affect everything else? And it's the story of my father's life-saving accident, as he describes it. Because this is a series of events that all had to occur in order for him to still be alive today. What had to happen was, the bottom line is, he was on his farm, in his front loader, in the tractor, trimming trees with a chainsaw. His farm help came along, accidentally moved the tractor, he fell. Thought he broke his ribs, went to the doctor. Good news is your ribs are fine. Bad news is you have lung cancer. Non-smoker, no symptoms. The best news is, it was a single solitary lesion in the right upper lobe. It had not had any of the invasive characteristics, not in the lymph nodes, not in the periphery. They took out his right upper lobe. He is better than new. And he is still free of cancer several years later. But how did that have to happen? When we talk about how everything impacts everything else. Well, what he was doing was dangerous. He had tried for 12 months at multiple auctions to buy a machine that was more safe, that was safer. He was supposed to have been on vacation at the time he was trimming his trees. He was supposed to have fixed the brakes on the tractor, but he hadn't had time. And that meant that his farm helper could come along and move that tractor, which was there because he hadn't gotten a better machine, and his brakes weren't fixed, cause him to fall off and have his lung cancer identified. All those things had to happen. That's the sort of domino effect. It doesn't directly answer your question, but that's the best that I can come up with. He calls it his life-saving accidents. He said, oh, what a coincidence. I said, Dad, there are no coincidences. And he says, you know, I feel like I have a second life. You do. Yes, ma'am.
Wondering about your take on the Florida Terry Schragel case.
This woman asked, what is my take on the Terry Schragel case? My take is wanting what is for the patient's highest good. That's always what I want. So it isn't it's not a matter of standing on either side of that particular situation. It is A, wanting what is for the patient's highest good. B, it is wanting to be respectful of what an individual has said they want done with their life. And I don't know what the exact facts are in that case, but that's where I stand in general.
I'm wondering if there's a lesson for the nation at large in her particular soul journey.
Yeah, the question was, is there a lesson to be learned in Terry Schragel's particular soul journey? I can only surmise, I don't know, but no, we are a culture who is afraid of death. And that has forced us as a culture to look at death and dying, who makes decisions, to look at individual rights versus government rights, I mean, all sorts of things. And on a soul level, my take would be that her soul did all of us a great service by allowing us to use her life story to start this kind of dialogue. Where it ends, I have no idea. But just like everything else, sort of coming back to your question, one individual, her life is probably going to change or have an impact on all of us. So that's what I mean, we're all connected. Yes, sir, way in the back.
When you encounter a spirit, is there any point to asking the spirit's name?
You can, and sometimes they'll tell you, and sometimes they'll tell you it doesn't matter. Yes, sir.
You mentioned that sometimes the soul can leave the body before the body actually physically dies. If the body is in a persistent vegetative state, is it possible the soul may have left?
The question was, if the body is in persistent vegetative state, is it possible the soul has left? I don't know because I've not been around anybody who's been in a persistently vegetative state. My hunch or guess is that I would think that is quite possible. Because certainly I've seen people in intensive care who are not actively dying at that time. Sometimes they may end up dying in the future, but I've seen them, they're critically ill and their soul is out. But it may come in and out. So I am guessing that somebody in a persistent vegetative state could have the same phenomenon of their soul coming and going, or maybe even having left, but probably not too far away because they're still alive. But I honestly don't know that for sure. Yes, ma'am.
I just want to share a thought with something that I've learned here right now that I'm going to take back that might have an effect, what you said about the domino effect. At home I have two friends of my sons who are sleeping over. They sleep over a lot, and I let them come over because there's not that many kids in my neighborhood that play there. And there's this little girl who comes a lot, and she's every time she comes, she draws very well, and she writes. And when I'm in a good mood, I always encourage her. I tell her, I said, keep going. You're doing good. You're going to be a good artist, and they keep it up, and I could tell like her face brightens. Well, I just came back from this vacation in Arizona, then I went to my sister's,